Thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker, and I refer members to my declaration in the Register of Members' Interests. My right honourable friend, the Secretary of State, is absolutely right that, of course, trade brings prosperity, it brings jobs. But global Britain is about much, much more than trade. And it is about our shared values, our respect for human dignity, human rights, equality, the rule of law, freedom, democracy. It's about how we work with others who share those values to establish the rules-based and maintain a rules-based international order that protects those values. And sadly, what we saw last week in the United States shows us how fragile the value of democracy can be when it is under pressure from populism and nationalism fuelled by messages disseminated on social media. And at the current point for the United Kingdom, post-Brexit, dealing with COVID, yet to deal with the societal and economic impacts of dealing with COVID, it is absolutely imperative that we reject any push towards nationalism and isolationism, and that we recognise the importance of global Britain. Indeed, it is more important today than I think than it ever has been. Now, global Britain, if we're going to lead as we can this year in G7 and the COP26, we also need to see a change in world politics, where absolutism, that you're either 100% for me or 100% against me and there's no compromise allowed, has taken hold. We need to move away from the world of strong men facing up to each other. We need to find more ways in which we can work with those to share our values, because those values are under threat and we need to work together to protect them. Global Britain has that position this year that enables us to do this. But in order to do it, we need to live our values ourselves. And I have to say to the government that threatening to break an international treaty shortly after signing it, that threatening to break international law and that cutting our international aid does not enhance our impact and impact of global Britain. In fact, it makes it harder for us as global Britain to get our message around the world. We have been respected because of our 0.7%, respected because of what we do, not just because we're British. But in the very few seconds that are available to me, Mr Deputy Speaker, I want to mention one issue which is a clear and present danger to global Britain, and that is the breakup of the United Kingdom. And we've talked in this chamber, we often talk about Scotland and about how important being part of the UK is to the Scottish economy. The reality is England needs the rest of the UK as well. The United Kingdom has a seat on the Security Council of the United Nations. I doubt that England would have a seat on the Security Council of the United Nations. We need to think about the impact of this, and I particularly want to mention my concern about Northern Ireland at the moment, because we have seen that issue of those empty supermarket shelves, not all due to the protocol, but certainly the protocol is playing its part, and the government needs to deal with this issue. Global Britain has a role to play on the world stage, but in order to do that, the government needs to ensure that we maintain the integrity of the United Kingdom.
Video link.
Thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker. A great pleasure, particularly to follow the Right Honourable Member for Maidenhead. And we don't quite agree on the future of the United Kingdom, I have to say, but we will always be on these islands friends and colleagues, and I hope allies. But it was David Hume that said the truth emerges from an honest disagreement amongst friends. Well, certainly from my side, I'm a friend to all members of the House, but we should be in no doubt this is a very honest disagreement. Global Britain is not my party's project. That'll surprise nobody. I don't wish it any harm, but frankly, I wish it wasn't being inflicted upon my country against our democratic wishes. And I listened carefully, as I always do, to the Secretary of State. As ever, 10 out of 10 for enthusiasm, but 1 out of 10 for detail. And I have to say 0 out of 10 for recognition of the current difficulties in the real world right now. If I was Trade Secretary of the United Kingdom, a moment of fantasy, and there was shelves empty on a part of the United Kingdom, I would have mentioned that before I would have mentioned global aspirations that are hypothetical at best, rather than the real-world consequences. And I'm struck as ever by the ability of the government benches to be giddy with excitement at potential upsides of what global Britain might be. And I do, for the record, wish it well. I really do want to see global Britain succeed. The battles of the past are battles for the past. But the hypothetical, aspirational advantages are as nothing when set against the real-world consequences that people are suffering in the real world right now, today. And there is no amount of red, white and blue breathless excitement that will distract from the fact that global Britain is an answer to a question that nobody in Scotland or Northern Ireland was asking. And frankly, nobody in Northern Ireland or Scotland is interested in right now, when we have far more pressing concerns. And the other fact is, regardless of the international links that global Britain, the UK, is going to have, the primary relationship in all forms of trade, human contact, cultural exchange is always going to be with the continent that we are part of and will remain part of. And despite the deal that was done, such as it was last minute in Brussels at the tail end of the year, far too much of the detail of that relationship remains utterly unclear, causing, again, real problems right now. And the fact that the House scrutiny of that agreement and the House scrutiny of those future relationships has been shut down, with the committee that should be doing it and is best placed to do it being closed by this administration, should really give us all concerns. And the number of things that we're losing, these aren't aspirational, hypothetical things. These are things in the real world right now. The loss of the Erasmus exchange is an act of economic vandalism against our universities and higher education sector. It came at the last minute to the talks, when previously we'd been told we will keep it, we'll try to keep it, we'll manage to somehow fix it. And at the last minute we were told, no, we weren't. So it's an act of economic vandalism against our universities, but it's an act of vandalism and vindictiveness against the future generations of students who will be shut off from those advantages. I did Erasmus myself in 1992, a long time ago, but the advantages I had then and gained then have stayed with me ever since. And it breaks my heart that future generations will not be able to take advantage of that. And the Turing scheme that has been suddenly created on the back of an envelope to replace it is a pale, pale shadow of those real rights. Presumably it was named after Alan Turing as someone who was treated abominably by the British government. It is an act of vindictiveness against future generations of students, and those responsible for that deception should really hang their heads in shame. Scotland, all of our universities want to remain part of the Erasmus programmes. We are, as a Scottish government, trying to find ways to do that. And I really would urge the UK government that if it wants to be global Britain, then it should respect the internal democracy of the United Kingdom and allow Scotland to maintain those international links. There are ways that we could do it, and we're working on that proposal. So where Scotland wants to stay in Erasmus, we also want to help our creative sector. And another thing we're losing, musicians' visas. According to the Musicians' Union, 78% of musicians, creatives, have travelled to the EU or EEA over the last year in order to trade, in order to do their business, in order to do that cultural exchange, that the soft diplomacy that global Britain surely relies upon. There was an offer from the EU side to maintain a 90-day visa that would make sure that the EEA was dealt with as a block for all of our creatives travelling abroad. Instead, the UK government rejected it in an act of vindictiveness against our creatives because they didn't want internal travel to be coming to us, inward to us. Again, that's something that I really hope can be reversed, because that is a poor decision and it should be changed. And as the real world consequences of loss of freedom of movement, because remember, the debate in the UK, the debate almost in this House, seems to be predicated on the idea that inward movement happens only in one direction. There are millions of UK nationals enjoying freedom of movement rights across the European Union, which has been a huge boost to us as a society and the soft power that global Britain surely depends upon. We want those rights back from the Scottish National Party's perspective. But as those rights and the losses of those rights become clear, the people of Scotland are going to have a choice. And as I say, I wish global Britain well, not with much enthusiasm, I have to say, but I do wish it well. I hope it works. But I'll be putting forward a different proposition to the people of Scotland: independence in Europe. There was nothing in EU membership that was holding the UK back from what it wants to do. And I very much echo the concerns from the member for Islington South and Finsbury mentioned about lack of ambition on human rights, climate change, environmental standards, all the things that we think the UK government is engaged in a race to the bottom for, rather than maintaining high EU standards. But we're going to be putting forward the independence in Europe, which will regain the rights for our exporters, for our universities, for our students, for our people who will regain the rights of freedom of movement, a huge societal and economic boost. And unlike in 2014, the first independence referendum, These are real-world rights that have just been taken away from us, and the consequences are clear. And we'll be able to set them against the aspirational advantages of global Britain. And I look forward to that discussion. And I look forward to holding this government to account for its promises. I wish them well in fulfilling them, but I am confident they will make nothing compared to the losses that we have all suffered by leaving the European Union in the worst way possible, and the lack of clarity that emerges from the continuing talks that will need to be maintained in order to take the future relationship with the European Union forward. Because whatever global Britain becomes, geography will not be altered. Britain is a medium-ranking state within the European continent. Scotland's comfortable with that, and independence in Europe is our political answer to the best aspirations of the people of Scotland. I think it's the best aspiration and the best answer to global Britain as well. Thank you, Mr. Speaker, Deputy Speaker.
Thank you. Tom Tuggan.